What's your worst story from the throw him in the pool, he'll learn how to swim parenting style? I got stung by a bee and my mother was convinced I was faking. At the point I started to struggle to breathe, she finally irritatingly relented and made me walk to the hospital pushing my baby brother's stroller the entire way. When I got there, the staff were mortified, horrified, sometimes mortified, apparently, rushed me in to give me an epinephrine shot, and luckily that did the trick. Many months later, a bee got into my bedroom, and my father called me a P for coming and getting him to deal with it, instead of dealing with it myself. You have to learn how to deal with these things sometime. Or, I could just ask someone not allergic to bees to come and safely deal with the bee instead of risking hospitalization. I had never gone camping before I was 11. I really wanted to go with my 10-year-old cousin. My parents took me to the woods and handed us the tent and a half full bag of ranch delicious and like a pack of bratwursts and my 7-year-old sister. Then they pulled off, leaving us to camp for the first time alone in the woods with a 7-year-old. Not a fun weekend. I never went camping again, but it was apparently fine because that's how my dad and uncle learned. I'm just grateful for the lack of serial killers and black bears. Not my story, but my mom's. She developed a phobia after she was thrown into a pool to learn how to swim. At the age of 70, she still doesn't know how to. She's terrified of being on the water, even in a safety vest. And then, some fake clairvoyant told her she would die by drowning. So we spent our summers in the mountains as far away from being on water. My dad was notorious for the rub dirt on it method when I got hurt as a kid. When I was 9 I was in a nasty motorcycle accident out in the desert. I broke and misplaced my fibula. The bone was protruding from my leg. My dad didn't want to end his desert trip early so he told me not to look at it and to keep trying to walk. I was in so much pain anytime I would move I would black out. My brother was so concerned he urged my dad that we should go home. My dad finally gave in but was so drunk he let my 11-year-old brother at the time drive us out of the desert. He was so nervous he hit so many bumps and each bump I would black out then come to. Once we got home he thought it would be best to sleep it off before going to the hospital. The next day I was admitted to the hospital and my dad was taken into custody by CPS. Dear God, what the frick. I was scared of the deep end so my dad threw me in. My cousin parked the inflatable mattress in the corner I was in immediately. My parents supposedly yelled at him to move. He didn't. I don't know how long I was under the mattress for, but I was spitting up water choking when I came back up. I was maybe 6 at the time. Wow, so the double whammy. Parents and cousin double teaming you to get you to drown. My younger cousin, 4 at the time, was a climber and always needed help getting down. His dad told his mom to leave him. He'll either learn how to get down himself or stop climbing. Cousin ended up climbing onto the roof, fell off and got impaled on a fence pole. One very expensive trip to the ER and he now has a cool scar on his thigh. Not a parental neglect story, but that reminds me of being 6 and jumping off our 2-story house. My family was roofers and they were fixing the roof. My uncle was walking around the driveway and I decided it would be fun to yell, "Catch me," as I leaped. He did indeed catch me. My parents about had heart attacks. LMAO. Hurt my arm playing football during morning break at school. Was sent home by the school nurse. My dad said it was fine. Bandaged it and sent me to school the next day only for them to send me home again within an hour. My mum made my dad take me to hospital and my arm was broken. My wrist had spilled lengthways. It was in casts for 9 months. I was secretly buzzing to be honest because, well, that showed him the knob. My father did the same thing. I broke my left arm on the trampoline when I was like 5 and I came in the house crying and he told me I was being dramatic and didn't take me to the hospital until the next day. I was volunteering at a parent-child zoo day and saw a few parents like this. The zoo had some free roaming peacocks and it was awful how many parents just didn't tell their too young to know kids that they can be mean. So the little toddler goes, "Wow, pretty bird," and tries to get a closer look, only to get chased and attacked by this thing while the parents watch. Most of them said something like, "You should have known better." Like, how if you never teach them? The child can barely walk. You expect them to remember that some animals have a strong territorial sense, and then your baby gets terrorized by this thing that's bigger than them and looks like an alien for all they know, and you don't even give them a hug? See also, that one mom we had to kick out of the zoo because she was encouraging her kids to antagonize the llama in the hopes it would spit on them. Yikes. People, have some empathy for tiny humans who trust you implicitly with their well-being. My stepmom walked us, me, sister, brother 10-12, deep into the woods and left us there to learn survival skills. We thought we were all out on a hike, then she distracted us and ran away. We wandered into camp hours later. We knew how to get back but searched for hours worried that something had happened to her. She was drinking margaritas and smirking. When I was about 5 or 6, I was very sick with the flu, fever, vomiting, sweating, congestion. It was awful. There was some mix-up at the pharmacy, and they thought I was my father and gave him adult medication, basically these giant horse pills. Now, normal child medication for things like this are syrups and chewable crap for obvious reasons. My dad comes home and tells me I have to take these meds. I have a hard time getting them down, almost choking a few times. My dad got frustrated and literally started shoving these huge pills down my sore throat with his angrily shaking fingers. I started crying. My nose was stuffed so I could only breathe through my mouth. I remember my dad's wedding ring banging against my teeth, eyes watering, gasping for air while looking at my mom for help. Eventually I coughed it back up, crying and throat on fire. I remember my mom demanding an apology from my dad, who just said, well, he's going to have to learn to take pills like that sometime anyway, and stormed off. Dang, I haven't thought about that story in 20+ years. My father-in-law decided when his first child was born that he and his wife, would not go to the baby when he started crying in the middle of the night, in order to teach him that crying doesn't get you anything in this world. Turns out, newborns need to be fed every 2 hours. So it's a good thing my mother-in-law ignored him and went to their newborn son, otherwise he might have died. OMG, so many people think you're supposed to ignore your baby's crying because it will teach them to stop crying, and that they manipulate you by crying. Dude, it's a baby, it can't manipulate anything, it doesn't even have thoughts. Just because you ignore it doesn't mean its needs go away. They cry to communicate and to survive. My brother and I are 7 years apart. When he was 16 and I was 9, he taught me how to box by putting a hockey helmet on me and beating the ever-loving crap out of me. I'm reasonably certain I was concussed, and I suffered horrible migraines from that day well into my 20s. Ignore them bullies, and don't show a reaction. When they're bored they'll stop. Completely false. And you wonder why I hate going to school so much. Mother, it's not a wonder that when I went to secondary school, I made a motto of don't stand for anyone's balls. I went through too much of this crap for anyone else to do the same. Ironically enough, there are studies that state that the trauma childhood bullying goes for the rest of one's life, so I'm pretty much set. I actually used to be a swim teacher in college, teaching private lessons in people's backyards because of parents who had thrown their kids into the pool to sink or swim. It was usually moms calling me for help because they heard from a friend of a friend that I was able to teach their kid and get them to like the water again in about a month or less. One kid, he was 7. I had to sit with him on the pool deck the whole first lesson and bring buckets of water to him. His dad had dunked him multiple times and insisted that his son would just figure it out eventually because that's how he learned. Needless to say, he was never home when I was there. The mom had me come while dad was at work. 4 weeks later she had me come later in the afternoon so he would come home towards the end of the lesson. His dad saw his son swimming and cried happy tears. He had no idea I had been there 3 days a week for a month. My favorite student was a 70-year-old man who wanted to do a triathlon but never learned to swim because his dad threw him in as a child. It took about 3 months total, a lot of hand holding on the steps and shallow end, but he finally achieved his goal and I got to cheer him on at the finish line. I still remember how each of my students clung to my arms and clawed at my neck in their first lessons. I never dunked or forced anyone out of their comfort zone. My lessons had to be customized for each student to keep it fun and relaxing. The trauma in their eyes was haunting though. It stayed with me and I never force anything on my kids that they aren't ready to do. It's about trust, not force. My dad and I once witnessed someone who literally did this for a little 3-year-old girl. This little girl was just playing at the edge of the pool, happily minding her own business when her dad ran up behind her, picked her up and tossed her screaming as far as he could into the deep end of the pool while yelling, "Time to swim, honey." At first my dad and I didn't react, cause my dad has done this to me as a game. I learned to swim first, but we started to notice that she was struggling to surface while dad just watched. My dad nervously asked, "Can she swim?" to which the guy just shrugs and says she'll figure it out. I have never seen my dad book it so fast to get at the water as I did that day. He quickly got the kid out of the water and started screaming at the guy about what kind of idiot he was while the girl was just bawling her eyes out. I swear my dad was ready to deck the guy. This was back in the 1990s, so we didn't have a cell phone to call the police, but we never saw them again after. It was the first time in my life I had seen insane parenting, and to this day freaks me out that some people will still do this. I was always a picky eater growing up. One time my mom sat me down with a small bowl of almonds and told me I couldn't get up out of my seat until I finished it. I insisted that I hated them and they were making my mouth itch. She thought I was just being difficult. I just started to swallow the almonds like pills because my mouth was so itchy from chewing on them. A couple years later I saw an allergist and discovered I was allergic to tree nuts. My mom did this to me with a peanut butter sandwich. You can't leave till you eat it, LMAO, one bite, and I ended up in the hospital. Undiagnosed osteomyelitis in my knee. Crap, doctor told us it was growing pains, so was told to just keep exercising it and walking. The abscess burst out of my left shin bone and caused blood poisoning and basically crippled me. But we'd booked a vacation in Paris, so I had to walk the whole city on various tours, and my mum insisted I was being lazy by losing consciousness every time I sat down. She finally consulted a specialist when I started to sleep for 3 days straight on the couch. My mom's old parenting style was sink or swim, but funny enough, it's when my mom tossed me in the pool. The summer between 1st and 2nd grade my family moved somewhere with a pool. My mom was adamant that I had learned to swim as a baby, so she bought floaties for my younger sister and refused to buy any for me because I already knew how to swim and was too big for floaties when I refused to get into any part of the pool I couldn't walk in. My mom called me from outside the pool and promptly grabbed me and tossed me into the 6-foot end. And surprise, I didn't know how to swim. I remember splashing twice, hearing my mom yell at me to stop panicking. Then I went under and tried swimming to the surface like I'd seen in movies, and eventually got my head a bit above water, coughed out a bunch of water and started screaming for help before I went under again. My mom told me to stop making a scene and swim towards the edge. I made it to the edge and couldn't pull myself out of the pool, so my mom yelled at me to swim to the shallow end. When I tried to grab onto the edge to just pull myself to the shallow ends, my mom kept taking my fingers off the edge and yelling for me to stop playing and just swim. When I finally got to the shallow part, my mom and family just went, "See, you still remember how to swim. You never forget." The biggest cause of drowning is not actually a lack of knowledge, but panic. So even if you had known, putting you in a terrifying and stressful situation significantly increases the chances of drowning. When people get scared, they behave instinctively, and if you aren't very experienced at swimming, it turns out your natural instincts are pretty terrible for swimming. 2 days after I graduated high school, I came home to an empty house. All my stuff in a U-Haul because my mom and stepdad moved without me. I have been financially independent ever since, but a heads up would have been nice. To make some clarifications, my real dad was not involved in this situation. He was on the other side of the country. I am still close with him, but he is very low income, so he could not help me in this. I went no contact with my mom for about a year, but she weaseled her was back in. I think I see her in person once every 2 years, and I do not acknowledge my stepfather exists. I have been considering going no contact with my mom again recently. They threw me in the pool. I drowned. I needed CPR. They let me use my floaties after that. That's terrible. Holy crap. During trauma surgery, a mom decided she needed a nap and told her 15-year-old daughter to drive. Mom survived. Daughter didn't. First and most painful organ harvest I did. Oh my god, that is horrific. My parents told me they were kicking me out at 18 in a move to motivate me. I was in college, no job and virtually no money. My grandfather had left me about 10k as savings bonds that I asked for but they wouldn't give me. So I made a plan. I went around to 5 different targets and shoplifted about 4 or 5 video games that I took to GameStop to sell. Stupid and wrong, I know. And at the end of the day I had about $600. I was planning on buying some weed to sell to get some income going till I got on my feet. But when I got back to my house a cop was waiting for me. Parents ended up cashing in my 10k to pay for the lawyer. When I was 10 my parents had my siblings, twins baby girls. Within 2 weeks I was babysitting them 12 plus hours a day, at least 5 days a week. Not only that, since I was already babysitting my aunt dropped off her 1 and 2 year old too. So I, who had no prior experience babysitting or caring for kids, was now babysitting 4 kids under 3. What a little crap show that was. When I got my very first period, then my family made a trip to the pool the next day. My mom shrugged it off and told me you don't bleed when you're swimming and never said another word about it. Spent the entire time taking trips to the bathroom. The first time I went to the pool on my period was the first time I used a tampon. Unfortunately I was too proud to read the directions. My mom didn't explain them to me and I spent the day with the applicator inside me. Didn't know you took it off until the end of the day when I removed it and wow, look, there's the cotton part. At age 4 my father decided that my sister and I should learn to tie our shoes. He made us stand there for hours trying to do it, crying. We just weren't quite old enough. I don't know if this counts but stop crying or I'll give you a reason to cry, something my dad used to say to me. It would send me into a panic. I was upset and didn't know how to stop crying and then hearing that would make it worse because now I'm crying cause my dad was mad at me and if I didn't stop crying he was gonna make me cry even more. People who say this don't understand that kids cry because they have a hard time controlling their emotions. It would be one thing if the kid was fake crying. But scaring a kid because they're crying and can't calm themselves down sure isn't going to help them calm down. Every time I asked my parents to explain something as a kid I was told either you're smart, you'll figure it out, or you just don't want to do it. Any attempt at maturity was met with either flat out laughter or being told that I was too young to worry about that. Cue me turning 18, and suddenly I'm expected to be an adult, get a job, pay taxes, and all that jazz. I asked where in the heck do I start, and they got pissy because I apparently hadn't figured anything out. Wonder why? My parents gave me the same you'll figure it out when my mom kicked me out at 18. I begged to come back to her house even if I had to pay rent because I was days away from being in a sleeping bag under a bridge. Was told you'll figure it out, you're resourceful. My mom forced me to drink milk and she thought I just hate healthy stuff and only prefer junk food. The thing is I always loved veggies but I also like junk food. Basically I love food except for milk. I just couldn't consume milk. It'd make me vomit and in the end I'd have sudden acid reflux not being able to handle it. She thought I was acting to escape but I just hated it. Turns out I'm lactose intolerant and my mom still thinks I'm making that up just because she can't let go of her ego. That basically describes exactly how my parents would teach me anything. It wasn't really teaching at all. It was showing me once super quickly, then expecting me to fully grasp the concept because I was supposed to absorb that knowledge from observation alone apparently. And when I wouldn't get it on the first time, I would be berated or beat. When I was 6, my parents tried to teach me how to tie my shoes. They showed me super quick once. Fast enough that I couldn't process what was happening, then told me to do it. I didn't understand and so they started yelling at me, telling me how I shouldn't even wear shoes because I was so stupid. I didn't learn how to properly tie my shoes until I was 18, and I had to teach myself. I still use the bunny ears method. The worst part of that was that people would make fun of me for not knowing how, and I couldn't explain the situation at home because they would have just thought that I was making excuses. Where I live, we have bags of milk. We have a pitcher where we place the bags, and I usually tie an elastic band around the corner that I snip open. One summer, when I was 5 or 6, I woke up bright and early because my brother was in summer school so I'd have the whole morning to myself. I went to make a bowl of cereal, and when it was time to put the milk back, my mom tried to teach me how to tie the elastic band to the bag. I did it, but she had told me it was wrong and so beat me and told me to do it again. For the entire morning she would tell me that I was doing it wrong and beat me. By the time I had my cereal, it was noon and my brother had already come home. I don't even think I was doing it wrong because I've been doing it the same way since then. I'm pretty sure my mom wanted an excuse to beat me. Your parents are crappy people. My mom told me and my sister, 8 and 6 at the time, to run away if we want Ed to leave so badly. We were told to do laundry but didn't exactly know how, so us being young took that opportunity and packed up to leave. 10 minutes later my sister was hit by a drunk driver. I still perfectly remember her crayon suitcase freaked up in the middle of the road. She was mostly fine from the crash, just scrapes and bruises. The real pain came from realizing our mother would prefer to challenge us to run away rather than teach us how to do laundry. She's currently NC and I moved across the ocean. It's better now. When I read the first sentence of that second paragraph I swear my heart stopped. Glad to hear you're doing better. 7 years old. Had an asthma attack at our camp in the middle of the night. At that time, treatment for an attack was a nebulizer machine that required electricity, which we didn't have at our camp. My parents kept telling me that I just had to calm down and breathe better so the attack would go away on its own. They only intervened hours later because they couldn't sleep because of all the noise I was making as I choked and gasped for air. We drove 3 hours back to our house, passing multiple hospitals along the way because they were embarrassed that I was in such bad shape and blamed me for just not breathing properly. Fun times. ETA. I've been trying to reply to everyone's questions, but there's a lot of them, so I'll just answer the most common ones here. I still have asthma, but it has been well managed for years now. I take Zenhale every day and Ventolin as needed. I've been no contact with my mother for over a decade. She's a narcissist who not only emotionally abused me but encouraged my older brother to do so as well. This led to him physically and sexually abusing me, and when I eventually confronted her on this, she said it was my fault for being such a b. I cut her out of my life and that's made a world of difference for my mental health. Obviously no contact with brother either. I am still in contact with my father. They divorced in my early 20s. We aren't close, but I still find enough value in the relationship to keep talking to him. He isn't actively cruel like my mother was, just lost in his own world. I guess you could say, I feel sorry for him that he hasn't managed to overcome his own demons the way that I have. Overall, I am happy and healthy now. I have a lovely husband, and we've created a good life for ourselves. I do have CPTSD from the years of abuse I lived through, but therapy and proper medication have helped tremendously. Thank you to everyone for your kind words. They mean a lot. I was at the beach one time and it was hot out. I could not walk on the sand without sandals on. I heard a cry and looked up to see a little girl standing barefoot on the sand, not more than 2, screaming for her dad, 5 feet away, who just told her to stop being such a little pea. Just about had a rage stroke and ran over to pick her up myself, but he eventually did. Ooh, that's so mean. Poor girl. Sand can be boiling in the middle of the day, even with flip-flops on, as it gets on your feet as you walk. I mean, my parents mostly did the minimum as they were too busy getting drunk and going to court with my siblings. Pretty much just thrown into life, though my mom did sell me weed and the occasional Valium when I'd panic from it all. My dad once said about someone who wasn't raised, he was dragged up. My older sister taught me how to ride a bicycle by putting me on the seat of a full-size bike at the top of our downward sloping driveway and giving me a good push, sending me flying down the driveway and jettisoning me into the street. I got the hang of it pretty quickly. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.